Donald Trump this week urged Iranian protesters to take over their institutions and promised that help is on the way. How can we reconcile Trump's pledge of support for regime change in Iran with his long-held isolationist stance? Will Trump be more successful with Iran than Bush with Iraq and Obama with Libya? What might go right and what could go wrong? What are the economic and market implications? Regime change has a long history in U.S. foreign policy. During the Cold War, Washington supported coup to overthrow governments seen as aligned with the Soviet bloc, including Iran in 1953 and Guatemala in 1954. After the Cold War, the stated rationale shifted towards enforcing international norms and promoting democracy, and U.S. actions became more overt, with direct military force deployed in Iraq in 2003 and Libya in 2011. But after the U.S. invasion of Iraq to topple Saddam Hussein, regime change became a dirty word, shorthand for strategic hubris, faulty intelligence, and a catastrophic underestimation of the difficulty of transforming a post-dictatorship society into a governable state. The Iraq War shattered U.S. credibility by exposing the limits of American power and the immense human, financial, and geopolitical cost of owning political outcomes it could neither predict or control. The conflict cost the United States an estimated $3 trillion and the lives of more than 4,400 U.S. servicemen and women. These lessons shaped subsequent policy. Barack Obama was more cautious in committing U.S. resources in Libya, limiting America's role largely to air power and support for NATO allies. Yet even this restrained intervention culminated in a collapse of state authority and a cycle of chaos that has persisted to this very day. Donald Trump's political ascendancy owed much to his opposition to regime-changing wars. His campaigns in both 2016 and 2024 appealed to voters disillusioned by foreign entanglements. Can Trump achieve regime change in Iran without protracted American involvement? How would this consideration influence the outcome of the current crisis? The latest protest in Iran is very different from the protests in the past. Past protests were mainly about freedom. For example, the core demand of the protesters in 2009 was fair elections. The 2022 protests, triggered by the death of a young woman in the custody of the morality police, was about personal and social freedom. The current protest is about survival, about the deprivation of basic economic necessities. This is why demonstrations and strikes have spread so quickly, and protests have been reported in all of Iran's 31 provinces. The main issue here is inflation. Official CPI data, for what it's worth, shows inflation reaching 48% in October. But anecdotal evidence suggests that lately, prices of basic food items like cooking oil have been increasing at a much higher rate. On the face of it, the spike in inflation is the result of two developments. One, a collapse of the rial, Iran's currency. Two, a recent decision by the Iranian government to eliminate the subsidized exchange rate for most essential goods. In theory, the elimination of the subsidized exchange rate should reduce import demand and support the rial. The fact that the opposite has happened implies a deterioration of both the fiscal and external balance. Economic data about Iran are scant, but shipping data suggests that Iran's oil exports have fallen sharply over the past 2 months, likely reflecting a combination of reduced Chinese buying and tightened sanctions. According to shipping data provider Kepler, Iranian oil, either on tankers in transit or in floating storage vessels, reached a record high of 166 million barrels in the week ending January 11th, the highest level on record in data going back to 2016. It would seem that efforts by the U.S. to shut down Iran's shadow fleet that is engaged in the covert delivery of hundreds of millions of dollars worth of oil are finally working. Moreover, with little usable foreign reserves, the Iranian government has few options to offset the falling export revenue. This means Iran's economic situation is set to get even worse. As economic reality faced by ordinary Iranian citizens become more desperate, the protests will intensify. In my view, Iran's worsening economic crisis has reached a tipping point. The only question now is the political endgame. I see 4 plausible scenarios. 1. Protest turns more violent and the US intervenes to topple the regime. 2. The Iranian government gives up its nuclear program in exchange for a lifting of the US sanctions. 3. The regime muddles through after China agrees to step up support. 4. The regime externalizes the crisis by embarking on a preemptive strike on Israel to rally the country around the flag. Ranked by the preferences of Iran's clerical rulers, Scenario 3 clearly dominates the choice set. It ensures the survival of the regime without ideological capitulation or war. It is safe to assume that the Iranian regime needs China, its biggest backer, more than ever, and it will do just about anything to persuade Beijing to increase its involvement in the country. But how does China feel about Iran right now? Will China come to Iran's aid in its hour of need? Iran has good reasons for hope. Iran is a critical hub for China's Belt and Road Initiative, serving as a vital land bridge to the Middle East, Europe, and Africa. Iran is central to China's efforts to diversify its trade routes, energy security, and establishing alternative corridors to maritime choke points. From China's strategic standpoint, Iran is far more important than Venezuela. Moreover, a new rail corridor linking China to Iran was just inaugurated. The railroad, stretching more than 10,000 kilometers, not only cuts delivery time, but will insulate Iranian oil exports to China from US sanctions. If I'm right that Iran's crisis is largely an economic crisis, then China can save the regime by throwing some money at its problem. It can even call it a humanitarian assistance to ease the hardship of the ordinary Iranian citizens. China won't have to send a single soldier or tank or even ship for that matter. Following this logic, it would seem that the benefit to China of propping up the Iranian regime outweighs the cost, at least for a short time. I have to believe that this is central to the deliberation in Beijing right now. But if I can arrive at this conclusion, surely Trump and Bibi Netanyahu can too. The US and Israel, for different reasons, have both a strong incentive not to allow China and Iran to strengthen their ties further. I strongly suspect this could push both to intervene in Iran quickly before help from China arrives. Because once China comes in with the money, Iran's economic crisis will ease quickly and the protests will die down, which will undermine the moral argument for US military interventions. Between the US and China, I don't know which side will move faster, but I know a race is on, and there's a lot at stake. What does this mean for financial markets? All I know is this: given what is at stake, risk premium in markets is probably still too low. As I argued last week, Maduro's kidnapping by the US has supercharged the competitive rivalry between the US and China. Iran will be the first test of the resolve of the two superpowers, and the stake cannot be any higher. Thank you for listening.